Hello there, welcome to this exam preparation video. The focus will be paper 2 of the mathematics exam, and we'll be looking at 21 keywords that you will likely encounter in that paper. I've already done paper 1 examination discussion, and I believe that you've watched it. If you have not done so, please watch it after this video. Remember, if you are benefiting because of this channel, please subscribe, please share with those that you know and will also benefit from this channel. All right, thank you very much. So let's go for it. Paper 2, remember the topics there is trigonometry, is analytical geometry, it's Euclidean geometry, it is measurement as well as statistics. All right, so those are your topics for paper 2. Let's go for the first keyword there, calculate. What are we calculating in paper 2? We're calculating the mean, for instance. Calculate the gradient, calculate the length of a line segment. And obviously your answer should be a number, all right? So you end up with numerical values. So that takes care of the keyword calculate. Number 2, describe or comment. So you can comment, for example, on the skewness of the box and whisker diagram. You can describe the trend of the data that is represented in the table or in the scatter plot, all right, or the cumulative frequency graph or a bar graph or a histogram. So there are different mediums that you can be given, and the question that contains these keywords just is asking of you to comment and describe, what you see happening in that data. All right, great stuff. Number 3, draw. What are you likely to draw? You are likely to draw trigonometric graphs that represents your sine function, cosine function, or your tangent function. All right. What else are you likely to draw? Scatter plot. You are likely to draw a cumulative frequency graph. You are likely to draw a box and whisker diagram. You see. So those are the different ways in which the question that contains draw can be phrased, and the expectation of the examiner thereof. All right. Let's go to number 4. Which one? So this is a selection question where if you're given 2 box and whisker diagrams, you are asked to select or to pick which one best represents the data that is given perhaps in a table format. All right, so you need to be aware of the meaning of this type of question right here. All right, you choose, and it may be followed up by this one here where you explain or motivate or substantiate why you have selected that particular box and whisker diagram. All right, great stuff. Determine, so you can determine the range, you can determine the median of a data set, you can determine the coordinates of the midpoint, you can determine the x-intercepts, for example, or determine the equation of a circle. So we have covered this one in the previous video, and we know what that means. Number 6, interpretation question. What does the correlation coefficient mean? Or for instance, after you determine the equation of the regression line, the equation of the least squares of the regression line, what does it mean to have a negative correlation coefficient or a positive correlation coefficient? And you want to also link that to the strength of the data, all right, or the strength of the relationship between your dependent and independent data set and variables. Number 7, prove the identity under trigonometry, right? You are given an identity that you must prove that the right-hand side through some mathematical means and methods you can get to the left-hand side, or conversely, left-hand side through some mathematical means and methods you can get to the right-hand side. So here you are proving a trigonometric identity which is similar to this one. You can prove or show that but it's not limited to trigonometry. Remember, in Euclidean geometry, we are what? Proving theorems. That is what we mean by that. And this I also covered in the previous video when I discussed paper 1, when you prove or show that something is so. All right, great stuff. 8, predict. Predict is really an action word that says observing or looking at the trend or looking at the data, for example. Predict what will happen in 10 years' time to maybe the population growth, if that is the context. All right, so you allocate an informed numerical value based on what you observe currently, given the information that you have. All right, write down, I've covered this as well. It is through inspection, it is an obvious answer to get to, it is something that you can read off, it's something that you can recall. All right, so you write down or you state whatever it is that you are required to state. Derive a formula. Think of your compound angle identities, you think of your double angle identities. You can be asked to derive a formula for one of those, for instance. Derive means you come up with an expression that represents whatever it is that you have. For example, cos of alpha plus beta, how can it be represented in another way? So it is very important for you to understand the word derive. Okay, 2D or 3D trig questions, you can be asked to derive certain equations that represents perhaps the height of a pole in a three-dimensional situation. Great stuff. Number 11, without using a calculator, I've covered this as well in the previous video. If you have not watched it, I encourage you to do so. That is explaining itself. Really, it's using your brains here just to come up with a mathematical structured solution to the question. All right. Hence is also covered in the previous question. It's a follow-up question that comes when you have done 1 or 2 questions prior to this one, to say, using your answers to the previous question or questions, now answer this current question. All right, so it's a follow-up question. Right, simplify. Example, you're given a fraction under the context of trigonometry. So it's a trigonometric expression you're asked to simplify using your reduction formulas and co-ratios. For instance, you will simplify. Remember, we said when you simplify, you start with a complicated expression, you end with a less complicated expression. Number 4, you solve. For example, you're given a trigonometric equation, you're asked to solve that or determine the general solution and therefore get the angles that are applicable or will satisfy that particular equation. All right, good stuff. So it will be a numerical value or an expression in terms of general terms, if it is a general solution question. Good. Number 15, identify. Identify means to spot, right, in what you're given. For example, identify outliers under statistics. All right, so you need to know how to do that, and there are 2 formulas that I believe you know by now to assist you in getting outliers of a data set if they do exist in that. All right. Estimate, and usually there'll be a range here in terms of what is acceptable for you to get that mark. All right. So you estimate the mean, for instance, in a grouped data set, right, which may not be the precise numerical value of the mean, but it may be an estimation not far away from the precise value. So that is you estimating looking at the given data set. For which values of x, for example, in trigonometric functions, you are checking for which values of x is the function increasing, is the function decreasing, where are the points of intersection if you have your sine and your cosine graphs in one axis sketched in one axis of graphing, then you will be able to know what is expected in questions like this. It was covered in the previous video as well. Okay, here's the graph. So after you sketch or after you draw your scatter plot or you draw your trigonometric functions, you'll be asked to interpret those graphs and answer questions that are related to the graphs that you've produced or the graphs that you are given, okay, to determine perhaps the period, to determine the amplitude, to determine maybe the range. Those are the properties of functions as well. Number 19, I've covered that one as well. Explain, motivate, substantiate your position that you've taken towards a question. All right. So number 20, I've covered complete. You may be given an incomplete theorem statement, right? And therefore you are required to fill in the missing words, or you may be given, an incomplete property of triangles or quads. And again, there you are required to fill in the missing words. Guys, this takes care of the keywords that you may find and will likely find and see in your examination, your paper 2 exam for mathematics. And as you can see, everything here is ticked, and that is what I wish for you, to get as many ticks as possible for paper 2 as well, and possibly that distinction and be that happy student going out of the exam room when you are done. So thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. I believe this was helpful, and remember to please subscribe, to please like the videos, and continue to learn as much as you can. See you next time. Shap shap.